On top of that, he also goes to the Huntington Library and studies, and my husband and he have cubicles next to each other. So I hear all the gossip, so don't say anything you don't want me to hear, Joseph.
Okay.
He also is an adjunct professor of Claremont Graduate School and trustee emeritus of the Parliament of the World's Religions. Both a scholar and peace activist, he has lectured at more than 60 universities and religious and secular venues around the world. And he served on the panel of experts advising the UN High Commission for Human Rights and the International Security Forum based in Geneva. Wow. So you can see our panelists are exactly the people we need to hear from today. So Carol Francis, take it and go.
Okay. Well, to begin with, we know there are no human rights violations in the United States, right? Because this is this great democracy we've all heard about since the time we were in kindergarten. Well, Kenyatta, how can we use the UDHR in our struggles to defend human rights in the United States?
Well, I just wanted to also kind of, first of all, just thank you guys for even having this conversation, you know, and not even just a conversation, just having that exercise there and you know, in a pedagogy kind of sense is really what's necessary, because we can just kind of give you papers and let you read it, but in that way, just like I teach as a professor at West LA College, I teach like that. That's how people learn. So I have an early childhood ed background. I have a bachelor's and master's from Cal State LA, where you are emeritus, and also I am working on a doctorate at Claremont School of Theology, so we're kind of intersecting quite a bit. So in my mind, starting just with this, the 30 that we're talking about, the articles, and having this conversation throughout all age groups, from my understanding. I have an early childhood ed background, and I believe children as early as 2 years of age could articulate that in some manner, you know, even if it's through pictures, right, or if we read a story to them. So I'm a firm believer in, you know, speaking to the children in the womb, you know, and having those conversations. So it's also about the conversations that we're having in our home, because I can't tell you how many conversations I've heard as a principal, former principal of LA Unified School District, that children come home or come from home into the classrooms and they tell it verbatim, trust me. And they will say exactly what's being said at home. So when we can wear the mask, right, and pretend out in public what we want people to perceive, but the children are actually watching and listening to us extensively. So that's one way that I would do it. And just put it in all the curriculars across the board, from early ed all the way up to college. That's what I would say.
Well, could you take apart the UDHR and find, are there particular
Oh, sure, with pleasure.
Ones that you would like to apply to the struggles in the United States?
Well, if you're talking about the United States, as she mentioned, I'm a Black Lives Matter member, and I was trying to not just delve directly in it. I was going to let all of us kind of unpack this a little bit. But if you think about just in the news, in the media, different things that are happening, you can look at Article 4 through, I would even say, up to Article 11, even probably 12. We're in violation of those. We have a huge population of African Americans that are being housed in jails for offenses that would be considered not from other counterparts. So we have people that are still in jail for felonies for marijuana. And we know that marijuana is legal in the United States right now, in certain parts of the United States, right here in Los Angeles, right? So we still have people being held under those crimes, right? We know that it's a crime for African Americans to even drive a car, even if they have licenses, right? Their cars are being impounded and they're put in jail, and their licenses are being suspended. So just like a really quick quote, there's an article that was written by Peter Wagner, and he talks about in the United States that there are 2.3 million people in jail. 2.3 million. I just want you to just kind of listen to that, hear that. 2.3 million, it's a lot of people, right? So just in beyond identifying the parts of the criminal justice system that impact the most people, we would say the most impacted are Black folks, right? And who make up 40% of the incarcerated population, despite only representing only 13% of the population in the United States. 40% are incarcerated. 40% Black women and men are incarcerated, 40%. And we only have 13% being represented as a population, so 40%. So we're only 13% of the population. So to me, I think that's a huge human rights violation. And now even more interestingly enough, in the last several years, women have been partaking in the criminal system even more so as well. Used to not be as many women. And then how many of you have heard of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow? I highly encourage people to read that. She did that book while she was having 3 children over a span of 5 years. So she quotes in her book how this was written during nap times. This was written during her feeding and nursing of her children. But she felt that she had to sit down and to collect the data that she had been collecting and to really speak this truth. Because if we think about Article 4, where it says that people shouldn't be in slavery and servitude, in our group we were discussing how basically prisoners are being given $1 a day to fight the fires in California. Now we know that a lot of people were impacted by the fires that happened in California. Now if they're released from jail, they don't have a right to go and to apply for the fire department because now they're a felon, right? And we do have some laws that are being helped or even being stated as far as felons being able to vote. But we know once you're being labeled as a felon, now you can't get housing, right? And we've been working on a lot of those issues and those measures. But it's not just that you're a felon and you can't get employment. Now you can't get employment. Now you can't get housing. Now you can't vote. So what happens when those things occur? What's going to happen? Recidivism. They're going to go right back into the system. And so if we don't want people to go right back into the system, we want to start having these conversations of not just saying they're being housed, because we know that this is the prison industry. I won't break it all the way open, but all of you know this. The prison industry is thriving, and it's a multi-billion dollar industry. So forgive me if I get a little choked up by it, because I'm not just here on this panel, I'm thinking about all of those people that are in prison who cannot just walk out tomorrow. We're talking about 20 and 30 and 40 years, and we have a lot of people who are political prisoners that are still in jail to this day from fighting the civil rights movements in 1968. So we're talking about 40 years of some people. Some people are just now getting released last year, right? And then they come out, and what do they have to come to? Nothing. So, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Well, we're going to go now from the United States to an area that is really a center of conflict and violation. So, Esty, how about the Middle East?
So it's fair to say that most understandings of the term or concept of human rights, either consciously or subconsciously, include the basic rights that are outlined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Middle East is a big place, so I was asked to focus on Palestine, Israel, and Saudi Arabia in the very short time we have. So I'll start with Saudi Arabia by saying that Saudi Arabia is not a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, having abstained from that vote. But according to Human Rights Watch and others, despite its assertions to the contrary, Saudi Arabia, by virtue of its membership in the United Nations, is obliged to uphold universal human rights standards, including those set forth in the Declaration, which are recognized as norms of customary international law. Other international instruments also elaborate these rights, most notably the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which 138 states are party, But again, Saudi Arabia is one of the few nations that is not a party to that either. The terms that cover that covenant provide guidance as to the content of the fundamental rights that Saudi Arabia is obliged to respect based on their participation in the United Nations and the universally binding character of those rights. But here's the thing. Saudi Arabian law is completely at odds with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as all citizens are required to be Muslim. Saudi Arabia does not have a written constitution or an elected legislative body. There are no elections of any kind. All political parties are banned, as are most forms of association. All critical political expression is forbidden. The press is strictly regulated, and assembly is severely restricted. There is nothing in their conduct that should lead us to believe they pay anything more than occasional lip service to human rights and their obligations to them as a member of the United Nations. And the recent murder of Jamal Khashoggi should make that perfectly clear to all. We have also yet to see if the UN or any other body will hold them accountable for that murder. Perhaps the kindest thing I can say is that they're not hypocritical. It might behoove us on the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to remember that it was written and adopted in the aftermath of World War II. It was intended to protect people from the horrific violations the world had just experienced, and to lay out an ethical and moral foundation of the rights and freedoms that all people are entitled to as a vision for the future. The Declaration is not perfect, nor is it legally binding, but it is the basis of international human rights law. The Declaration is based on the inalienable right of every person to freedom and equality without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. The proclamation puts special emphasis on freedoms of thought, conscience, religion, expression, and most of all, the right to nationality. This 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration, ironically, also marks the 70th anniversary of the founding of Israel and the Nakba, or catastrophe, for the historic Palestine that resulted in the expulsion, murder, and to date the permanent dislocation of approximately 1 million Palestinians. Israel is a signatory to the Declaration. Its Hebrew version appears on the homepage of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. However, Knesset members are not bound to it, not in spirit nor in principle, as they are not bound to the never ratified founding document of the State of Israel itself, their own Declaration of Independence, as both of those documents are at odds with the founding principle of the state, that it be of, by, and for Jews only. That is, unless you're talking about financial, political, or military support. In fact, Israel's relationship to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights might well be best illuminated each year when the annual report of the Association of Civil Rights in Israel is published, revealing new, often alarming accelerations undermining all the issues the UN Declaration refers to, infringing on the freedoms of demonstration, protest and expression, restricting the freedom of political activity, limiting demonstrators and activists' rights, constricting freedom of movement and demonstration in the Palestinian territories, blatant discrimination against women, eroding social rights, and new anti-democratic legislation. In countless reports by Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and others, Israel has been accused of violations of human rights as a result of its occupation of the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, but also because of its activities in Lebanon and the siege and assaults on the imprisoned civilian population in Gaza. The list of those violations is long and serious, yet successive Israeli administrations rarely respond to accusations at all. And if they do respond, the message is usually framed within a false discourse of self-defense. While the Universal Declaration states that all people are born free and equal with dignity and rights, because Israel singularly, with almost certainty, benefits from a US veto, for 70 years, our government has aided Israel in denying Palestinians just that. Palestinians have uniquely been excluded from all the formal articulations of human rights law, and often through Israeli law. There are currently over 60 Israeli laws that deny Palestinians equality. The Universal Declaration protects against things like torture and cruel and degrading circumstances and punishments, yet Palestinians are physically and psychologically tortured by all appendages of the Israeli state. In fact, the Israeli High Court has, through its findings, confirmed that physical torture is permissible in regards to Palestinians because of their unique security threat, a claim Israel uses systematically to act as it pleases in all situations. And this is despite Israel having signed the Convention on Torture in 1986 and ratifying it in 1991. After all, the very existence of Palestinians bears evidence to the many inconvenient truths that the Zionist project and those who support it in the US deny and have moved from oppressing and smearing to now attempting to criminalize here in the US. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights insists upon fair and public hearing by impartial tribunal, yet Israeli military courts, the sole system afforded to the majority of Palestinians whose lives Israel rules over, has an over 99% conviction rate, leaving no other conclusion than Israelis are incapable of or simply unwilling to provide fair trials to Palestinians. Freedom of movement, the right to education, housing, freedom to worship, family reunification, settlement expansion, access to water, home demolitions, the demolitions of entire communities, as is imminent for the Bedouin village of Khan al-Amar. I could go on, but I won't. To all paying attention, it is clear that the plight of Palestinians is worsening. Human Rights Watch reports for years have proclaimed that Gaza will be uninhabitable by 2020, and many of those reports were published before Israel's inhumane bombardment of Gaza in 2014. Settler colonialism and apartheid have been normalized and enshrined into law this year by Israel's nation-state law. Trump's actions to settle issues considered final status issues to be agreed upon in an ever-elusive peace deal like the capital of Palestine and the status of Palestinian refugees, along with his defunding of UNRWA and hospitals that serve the Palestinian community, have made this situation much worse. But if we're to be honest with ourselves, he has merely pulled back the curtain that other presidents used to mask US policy. No American president has confronted the Palestine exception to human rights, international law, and free speech. Instead, they have, almost without exception, used their veto power in the National Security Council to protect Israel from any accountability. The Security Council, you see, is made up of 5 permanent and 10 rotating members, and it was designed to reflect the world order that prevailed after World War II. Those on the side of the victors were granted permanent membership and veto power that allows a single country to defy the will of the majority of the international community. It is this unfair and unwise system, which remains in effect today, that has perpetually weakened the moral foundation of the UN through misuse of the veto, the lack of accountability, and unfair representation in the Security Council, where not a single African or Latin American country is a permanent member, thus crippling an organization whose stated mission is to uphold international law and achieve peace and global security. Palestine EC is a perfect example of how the misuse of the veto and lack of accountability have paralyzed the UN's efficacy to solve a man-made humanitarian disaster and a travesty of justice. As former UN Special Rapporteur Dr. Richard Falk advocates the need for a stronger UN, he also argues that from the perspective of current geopolitical trends, the UN seems to have declined almost to the vanishing point with respect to overarching challenges that states acting on their own cannot hope to overcome. What we must demand are intelligent re-examinations of its functions, structure, and allocation of resources to make it better equipped to meet the challenges of the future. Because failure of the UN to reform itself, to be effective in solving the problems we now face and those we cannot yet see, threatens our very existence. What we have holding together an increasingly strained world order is the at least partially paralyzed UN and conventions like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which some of the worst abusers of simply ignore with impunity by veto. And we simply cannot let the time-honored non-violent means of collective action, boycotts, divestment campaigns, and calls for sanctions to be villainized, criminalized, and weaponized for the benefit of one country only, Israel. We cannot let our freedom of speech be exceptionalized for the benefit of one country only, Israel. When acclaimed academic and former CNN commentator Mark Lamont Hill proclaimed at the UN that Palestinians from the river to the sea should be free this week, he was fired by CNN. He said, quote, "We have an opportunity to commit to international action, to give us what justice requires, a free Palestine, quote, from the river to the sea," end quote. And those 6 words got him fired from CNN. For anybody wondering who else uses language about the river and the sea, the first article of the original 1977 Likud party platform, Netanyahu's party, states, "The right of the Jewish people to the land of Eretz Israel," which means all of historic Palestine, is eternally and indisputable, and is linked with the right to security and peace. Therefore, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, will not be handed to any foreign administration. Between the sea and the Jordan, there will be only Israeli sovereignty. Mark Lamont Hill asked us, in his speech at the UN on Wednesday, to embrace radical hope. What I am asking us here today to do is to embrace radical action. For in the words of another American educator, author, and activist, Grace Paley, the only recognizable feature of hope is action. Thank you.
you. We give Joseph the big one. Kenyatta has the United States. Esty has the Middle East. Joseph has the rest of the world. Are there any human rights violations in the rest of the world?
All right, well, first of all, Carol Francis, thank you to ICUJP, thank you to the Islamic Center. I'm very happy as someone who's taught this UN declaration in multiple settings to be able to celebrate the 70th anniversary. It is, and I'm very glad that you printed copies, it is the greatest moral document of the post-war period, all right? And in case my authority means nothing to you, which I hope it does, but nonetheless, here is Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General, who calls this document, which I consider sacred, the yardstick by which we measure human progress. And the Nobel laureate Nadine Gordimer goes even further in describing it as the essential document, the touchstone, the creed of humanity that surely sums up all other human creeds directing human behavior. And I could go on with the Anconians, but do I have 15 hours, right? Okay, good. So 15 hours, I hope the Islamic Center has breakfast for us tomorrow morning. But the important point is, I'll make 2 or 3 points because I think it's important on this 70th anniversary to get a sense of historical perspective. I've just described it as the greatest moral document of the post-war period. And yet, it doesn't cover many of the world's ills, all right? Climate change, nuclear weapons, the fact that there is gross inequality of income and opportunity between the global north and the global south, where 40% of the world's population of 9+ billion live on less than $2 a day. Less than $2 a day, all right? That's sort of not covered here. And, but even to get this document, all right, and was a great achievement. And it could simply not happen today, all right? Why? Because this document deliberately hoped to get universal agreement, right? And just to give you an idea of how difficult this is, it took 3 years, all right, from the time of the UN Charter in 1945 to December 10th, 1948, where some of the best minds were canvassed by the ever-pragmatic Eleanor Roosevelt, all right? And within a year and a half, the people were fighting. I mean, Jacques Maritain, René Cassin, some of the greatest minds who were drafting this document, simply could not come to an agreement on the basis on which a fundamental question is, all right, we take human rights for granted, but what gives us as humans the right to have these rights, all right? How can we guarantee it? In what concept? In what idea? The opening speaker here from the Islamic Center mentioned one basis, the fact that in the Abrahamic religions, we are seen as creatures of God, but that's only a small slice of the world's population. Hindus don't necessarily believe in a creator God. Vast number of Buddhists don't believe in that concept. The Chinese and the Japanese religions don't have the idea of a universal and unitary God. So if you're hoping to get global agreement, it is an extraordinarily difficult achievement. And for that alone, the team needs to be congratulated, because as I said, if we are realistic, which I hope we are, you could not get that agreement today, all right? Today, 70 years later, the situation has radically changed. Estee mentioned the very propitious and the very special circumstances, and that's how we have to look at human history and how contingent it is. It was the very special circumstances of the Holocaust and the fact that the world had endured 2 world wars within the space of about 30 years. It was those set of circumstances that was able to get this document, and only that severity, right? Because the preamble to the UN Charter of 1945 says, this is 1945, and it took 3 years in order to get this agreement. We, the peoples of the United Nations, are determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom, right? It was that extremity and that crisis that, in a sense, was able to achieve this consensus. But it wasn't a consensus on basic principles, all right? And that's what has led to a number of objections which have come from the so-called Asian values debate, where China, for example, in defending the slaughter of Tiananmen Square, said that they didn't see any validity, philosophical or moral, to the fact of free speech and free expression, which the students were trying to do in 1989, and felt that, according to Confucian practice, the Chinese state had the full right and the full authority to squash that freedom of speech, all right? And likewise, many Islamic countries, Saudi Arabia being only one of them, has objected to this document. And of course, the other side of the coin is that even the signatories, the United States being the prime example, violate this document and its provisions left and right without batting an eyelid, all right? Not only what Grace pointed out at the start, the atrocious and shameful denial of asylum and the separation of families at the border, but the fact that the present administration brazenly overlooks human rights, has withdrawn, even though it still remains a signatory, it has withdrawn all funding for the Human Rights Council, all right? And I mean, this is the president who, when he goes to Europe, says, we are being fleeced because, according to him, Europe is not paying its fair share of the defense involved in NATO. And yet, this sort of nominal charge to the Human Rights Council, some $200,000 or maybe a little bit more, even that is being denied by the United States. So but there's one point that I want to make to bring it right home to us. I'm extremely glad that we've had this pedagogical exercise, a brilliant strategy, because obviously this needs to spread this idea that human beings have these basic rights, irrespective of nationality, of race, of custom, and again, it's not just the United States. My own country of India violates these left and right in its treatment of minorities, and in its most shameful treatment of the untouchables in the Indian caste system. So there are multiple violators. So why then do I hold up this document, which is one moral instrument among others? I want us to understand that clearly. This document is not going to address problems of climate change. It's not going to address questions of nuclear weapons. We have to look elsewhere for that. But nonetheless, in its limited but important sphere, it is, as I've said, and I'm repeating again, the single most important moral document of our time. But this is not something that just affects the rest of the world. I'll give you a very vivid example. When this very panel was announced, one of the very prominent interfaith activists in Los Angeles, with whom I worked for many years, called me up in great distress. And she said, Joseph, do you know whom you're speaking with? And I said, I haven't looked closely, but I think there's Jewish Voice for Peace. She said, they only represent one. This was even before this panel sort of got together, all right? And the fact is that what we've heard from Esti, to the great credit of the Jewish left, which is, I'm glad to say, represented in this room, is, as we all know, a tiny voice. It's not just Mark Hill who gets fired from CNN. It is a very sad fact that even the people who work in interfaith circles, as I do, are not willing to get the Palestinian side of things, all right? And what is absolutely ironic is that if you read in Israel, the liberal voices, you'll get more difference of opinion in Haaretz and in people who are really concerned about the way in which the Netanyahu government and the Israeli state are denying rights to not just Arabs, but even my favorite philosopher, Spinoza, those who are Spinozists in or Sephardic Jews are denied full citizenship in the state of Israel. I mean, this is an extraordinary situation where a state denies its own people and its own ethnic groups because they happen to be free thinkers or because they happen to be humanists, are denied certain rights. Leave aside the Arabs, all right? And so, as I said, there is a lot of work for us to do, but I think one of the, and that's where I'm going to end, is how radical this statement here is, all right? To say that irrespective of ethnicity, race, gender, political opinion, people, just by virtue of being human, and just by virtue of their human dignity, all right, however that dignity is conceptualized, but just by virtue of their basic human dignity, have a right to these 30 provisions, all right? That requires an elevation of our moral consciousness, because we are still, as my dear friend in the interfaith movement, who will go unnamed, exemplifies, and she's just one among many, we still are a tribal people, all right? Our consciousness is still a tribal consciousness where we will look after our own, all right? And the idea that the stranger, the foreigner, the other has her inalienable rights is something that is at best, honored in the breach. And I'm going to end there.
Yeah, I was hoping there'd be time for Q&A. We are supposed to end at 4:30, but I don't think anybody's going to mind if we take a few questions. Well, I want to point out a few things. Joseph was talking about, it's not going to mention nuclear arms or climate change. 1948, you know, that was a while ago. Both gay rights and environmental rights came out in the 70s. I mean, Silent Spring wasn't even written till the 60s. That was just something that people weren't thinking about. But if you look at Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Hey, that is, you know. And Article 2, Part 1, where it says no discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national, social origin, property of birth, or other status. Well, that includes gay rights, doesn't it? Yep. So, I mean, we can look at these and say, okay, they were written in 45, and, you know, and what would they mean if those people were around today? And also, Article 7, all people are entitled to protection from discrimination in violation of this or against any incitement to discrimination. So those who say, I have the right to incite people against Muslims or against blacks or anybody else, you know, maybe the U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about it, but this does. The U.S. Constitution, if you've seen the documentary 13, anybody here seen 13? Slavery forbidden by the U.S. Constitution, except as punishment for crime. Article 6, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery or the slave trade shall be prohibited in any form.
Article 4.
4, I'm sorry. I can't. 4, great. Thank you. So it's ironic to me, and it just really blows me away, that Eleanor Roosevelt, who pushed this thing through and chaired it and guided it and everything, knew that her country was in violation of so much of this. Yeah. We have time for a few questions.
Yes, I remember the first time I heard about this, was during the life of Malcolm X, who came back. He spoke on human rights and as opposed to civil rights in this country. However, we're now faced with an unfortunate reality that civil rights is going to be under attack more. You know, it's under attack already. And so as we look at this as a world document that's in every other country except here, I'm wondering how do we save what we know as civil rights is under attack and still uphold this so that this doesn't become something that takes our attention away. We have something already. We don't want to lose that, and at the same time, this is a great thing.
Well, just a very quick word. I mean, we should be clear what this document is meant to do. It's not meant to cover all civil and political rights. There are constitutions, there are sets of laws in each country that are responsible for that. This particular document is meant to be a document that applies to all peoples in addition to the civil and political rights. So when, for example, in the case of Black Lives Matter or in the case of LGBTQ rights, we have to look at the laws of the United States to change them in favor of being non-discriminatory, all right? And so it's important in terms of political agency, all right? to know where to fight our battles, all right? This document is meant to say, all right, when you have countries like, let's say, Serbia, just to take an example, all right, that is, carrying out a genocide or so on, and there don't seem to be any instruments, either because the country is in war or because of the weakness of the laws, then people have, outside Serbia, in Croatia and elsewhere, have a right to intervene, all right? And so Mr. Pinochet from Chile, all right, could be arrested in Spain, all right, while he was able to, in a sense, through his generals, we're talking now about past Chilean history, but because of this document on the UN Declaration, they then came up with a set of provisions whereby he could be arrested in Spain and brought back to Chile. And likewise, our dear former Secretary of State, Mr. Henry Kissinger, had better be careful where he traveled, because in certain countries, he is likely to be served with, arrest papers.
Thank you.
Likewise, there's been a call for the arrest of Mohammed bin Salman in Argentina right now that a jurist there has taken up.
I'm glad that you mentioned El Hajj Malik Shabazz, too, also known as Malcolm X. That's how my father and mother came by Islam, was in 1968 by listening to his teachings. And when you think about some of the messages that he spoke, he really called out the United States on many, many levels. And he wasn't afraid, and I think that's why he was murdered, was because he was very, very specific about what we've done in this country for the last 400 years and continue to do. So as we think about current day, Michelle Alexander's book is very pressing in saying the new Jim Crow. So we know that these things are happening. So I think we just have to keep continually looking at the atrocities that have happened in this country. When we think about Vietnam War, we think about Muhammad Ali when he said, no Viet Cong ever called me a nigger. And excuse my French, but he's being very real when he says that, right? But yet we sent many people, including my father, to Vietnam War, and those people are still suffering PTSD and they murdered millions of people from that. So it's just, we have to continue just to think about it. And I think what this document does is it really just kind of, even though we all have our own constitutions in our different countries, it really calls us to the table. It's the United Nations. Everybody is sitting at the table and agreeing to this. And when we think about, I just wanted to say with Saudi Arabia is actually going against the Quran. The Quran basically speaks to that. It's our Magna Carta. It talks about human rights all through it. It talks about how you aren't to be tribalist and, in an authoritarian way, or, to overstand people in economic status, or even say that they can't be a certain religion. If we know Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam married Jewish women, okay? He married African women, so they're going against the Quran. That's my piece on that. And elderly, yes, absolutely.
Excuse me. Where to start? I'd just like to do a drop of optimism into the day.
Yes, we want to end on that, yes.
When it says by someone that the worst things for Jews is to despair. So when I look at Israel, my heart breaks, and a little Palestinian girl lies in my heart next to Anne Frank. But the fact is, there are many groups in Israel that nobody talks about. And there is a new film out on Netflix called Disturbing the Peace. And the movie is about Israeli officers who are refusing to serve, and ex-terrorists, really, who have joined together. There are numerous groups like that. They're small, but it's sort of like this group. They're there, and they're doing it. That's all. Try and see the movie.
Thank you, Rita.
Thank you. We're doing so many.
I'd like your comments on, the lack of a better term, timeline of history, how long it takes these things to happen, and looking forward. The Magna Carta took, 160, 200 years to evolve, into reality. The Communist Manifesto took 60 years to come to a semblance of reality. The Atlantic Charter took 6 years not even to come forward. And we've had these pronouncements over many centuries for that matter. Do you have the hope that a document like this is going to follow in those footsteps, or is it going to be another propaganda piece, which I think the Atlantic Charter was?
You go this way. You go this way.
No, really,
Well, your skepticism is well founded because, as all of us have said, the violations of this are just flagrant.
Yeah.
All right, and it does not have legal backing. All right, this is a moral document. It's not a legal document, and there's no sort of binding legal code whereby transgressors can be punished. They can be punished in the court of public opinion. They can be punished under particular jurisdictions. But except for the International Court at Hague, there is no sort of legal underpinning. All right. But having said that, it's given rise, and that was something that Carol Francis was intimating. It's given rise to a great number of succeeding declarations. The Declaration on Women in Beijing, the Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, the Declaration for the Protection of Children. So it's a moral platform that has, in a sense, slowly, with all the reverses, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but still we keep going.
I think Israel is just the opposite. It's 2 steps back and 1 step forward.
Yeah, but then the point is that when international pressure is put on Israel, right? It's not going to come from the United States, obviously, as is well pointed out. But certainly in the United Nations, there is extraordinary pressure on Israel to grant the basic rights to the Palestinian peoples.
But it can come from the United States if it comes from all of us.
I think I want to just extend that sentiment. The power in numbers. Us in this room, 35 people, it starts with us. We have a conversation with our neighbors, and then the neighbors have a conversation with their neighbors, and it just continues and it keeps happening. And we just have to keep living this legacy and giving this legacy to our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. It'll happen. God willing.
Oh, somebody left these beads on the table.
Hi, I just want to thank everyone, and I agree 100%. We are 35 here, but I think a United Nation like this one would be a great one.
Yeah.
I think we need a new United Nation, total new United Nation, because it doesn't exist. In my opinion, it does not. It has proven not existing for so many times. And one little comment when you talked about the global countries and the Abrahamic religion. I think the Abrahamic religion really includes Buddhism and includes the Japanese and includes the Chinese in the part of the peaceful that we accept really everyone. So I'm hoping that we can push for their yes all the time and for their consent on a lot of things, because I don't exclude them. When I read Buddhism and I read Quran, I see tons of things in common. Tons of things in common. They call it Sufism, but when I read the Quran, and I'm not talking because I'm a Muslim, I'm talking because I really grew up in a Catholic school, 100%, and we had Jewish friends, and so on and so on. But the first word of Quran is Iqra. Iqra means read. Read means get knowledge, get to know each other. I never asked anybody if I meet Rita for the first time or Esti for the first time, I would never ask for their religion. I would like them for who they are and what they say and what they think. And that's exactly what the Quran is asking. Mind your own business. We are the only religion actually that does not preach. We are not allowed to preach. We don't go to other countries and try to convert them with Bibles or others. In spite of that, we respect it, and it's free. They want to convert, let them convert. Everyone is free. So again, I thank everyone on the name of the Islamic Center. I'm doing this on my own. I did not take permission to thank you guys, but I'm really impressed for every word I heard, starting from from you and our exercises. I love that, and I love your presence, and you could not have chosen a better place to do this, and I hope we do it more.
Nobody claims these.
Garrett Francis, I've got to go.
We have to go.
It's
Okay.
4:05. I've got to go.